Greetings, attendees of the ADR and ODR Forum at the University of Trento. Hello, my name is Colin Rule. I am CEO of ODR.com and Mediate.com. And I'm very sad because I could not be there with you in person. So I agreed to deliver a presentation via Zoom, which I was very excited to do. And then foolishly, I got my time calculations wrong, and then I missed the session this morning. So I want to offer my sincere apologies for that. That is my loss. I wish I could have been there with all of you live. But Luca very kindly gave me the opportunity to deliver my presentation in a recorded format. So I will create this file and send it to you, and you can see some of the comments that I would have made. I would have been very eager to hear all of your comments and questions in person. But please, if you have any thoughts, comments, questions about any of the things I'm going to share today, please don't hesitate to send me an email at crule@odr.com. And I would love to wax poetic and hear your thoughts, whether or not you're excited about the rise of artificial intelligence in dispute resolution or you're terrified of it. I'm still eager to hear from you. And again, sincere apologies for my time conversion mistake this morning. But today I'm gonna talk about the rise of the fourth party, artificial intelligence in the future of dispute resolution. And I'm going to share some slides and some examples. I can even give you some URLs that you can check out with some exciting websites with information about online dispute resolution. As you might understand, artificial intelligence is changing like crazy. Almost every week there are new announcements released, not only by the big companies, Google and Amazon and Microsoft, OpenAI, but also open source projects that are cropping up all over the world. I saw that today Facebook released its competitor to the latest ChatGPT 4.0. And this new Facebook open source competitor actually includes the ability for the AI to make sense of images. So it's such a moving target. It's exciting to see where all of this is going to lead us. But the questions I want to talk about today are, how does all of this matter in the world of dispute resolution? So if you don't mind, let me click the magic buttons here and bring up my slides. And I'll show you a little bit of my sense about where we're going. So obviously, ODR.com stands for Online Dispute Resolution. That's the portion of the field that I have spent most of my energy in over the last 25 years. And for that time period, we have usually defined ODR as the use of information and communications technology to help parties resolve disputes. Now, at the beginning, when ODR was first arising, say in the late 90s and early aughts, this definition was fine because there wasn't a lot of use of technologies to help people resolve their disputes. So essentially, ODR, and I was party to some of the conversations where we named the field, we decided to call it ODR because we wanted to emphasize its connection to ADR. And I've always felt that ODR and ADR are fundamentally the same thing. They share the same goal, which is helping people resolve their disputes. It's just that ODR brings technology into the room. So ADR is face-to-face mediation, face-to-face negotiation, face-to-face arbitration. ODR is all of those things, but bringing technology into the process. And there are many different ways that technology can change and augment dispute resolution processes, and we can talk a little bit about that during this presentation. Now, I think that this definition, unfortunately, there's so much happening in ODR that it's a little bit too broad to be useful. Just the use of information and communications technology in any form to help parties resolve their disputes. Well, if we call that ODR, some people say to me, is Zoom ODR? And my answer to that is, well, it can be. You know, if you do a mediation and you use Zoom video conferencing to connect with the parties, yeah, that's ODR. You're using technology, video conferencing technology, that's clearly an information communications technology, to help parties resolve their disputes. So the answer is yes, that's ODR. But you can also imagine how you could use Zoom to exacerbate disputes. If you got on a call with your sworn enemy and you swore at them and proclaimed you were going to get vengeance, well, nobody would call that ODR. So Zoom is merely a forum for communications. It doesn't say anything about what happens in those communications. And the same thing could be said of many different other technologies, whether or not it's text-based communication, or even if it's avatar-based communication, where users are represented by graphical figures, and they can interact in a 3D space. Well, is that ODR? Sure. If you try and resolve disputes using that technology, I guess it is ODR. But if you exacerbate disputes, again, then it's not ODR. So it's not, ODR is not just the technology, it's also what you do over the technology. Now, the National Center for State Courts in the United States actually has a different definition of ODR. They call ODR a collaborative workspace, in essence, a public-facing digital space in which parties can convene to resolve their dispute or case. And I think this is a good definition. It's a little bit more specific, right? It's a public-facing digital space in which the disputants can come together to try and achieve a resolution. So the good thing about this definition is it says, what are we doing in that digital interaction? Well, we are convening to resolve the dispute or case. So that's a little bit more specific. But one of the things that this definition leaves out is what we're going to talk about today, which is artificial intelligence. It's not merely an online meeting room that everybody can dial into in order to resolve their dispute. There's other things that technology can do. It can play an active role in the process of resolution. Now, I will say also, I'll go back one slide. Originally, we called ODR as just helping people resolve their disputes. Well, now, in parallel with the face-to-face field, I think we don't talk purely about dispute resolution. We also talk about dispute prevention, dispute management, or conflict management, and then conflict resolution. So that's a broader concept of what we're doing. Disputes often imply two parties on a very concrete disagreement. And I think when you think about the prevention, management, and resolution of conflict, I think we're seeing examples of ODR projects that embody all of those different terms. But this notion of a digital space where parties can convene, what technology is now adding to it is the notion that technology has a seat at the table. And that gets to the title of this session, when I talk about the rise of the fourth party. Now, I did not come up with this concept of the fourth party. This was first coined by the father of online dispute resolution, Professor Ethan Katch from UMass Amherst, in a book that he wrote with Janet Rifkin, another ADR pioneer. And they talked about technology as the fourth party. So if party one and party two are the disputants, and party three is the human neutral, then the fourth party is technology. And it also has a seat at the table. And the good thing about technology, and I put this image of this happy little robot here, because I think it doesn't have to be so scary. I think some people think about technology as a very overweening presence in their dispute resolution process. But I don't think it necessarily has to be the case. The third party really dictates how the fourth party engages with the process. And if party one and party two really don't want there to be any technology, they want it to be an entirely offline process, well, that's fine. The third party can say, okay, we're not going to have a fourth party involved in this case. But increasingly, party one and party two want the engagement of the fourth party. They expect to be able to leverage technology in the way that they resolve their disputes. Because, as I say, the fourth party, the technology is always in their pocket. It's available 24/7, and it's far more convenient. It saves you time, it saves you money, and it can lighten the administrative burdens of a process. So again, when you are engaging with the fourth party, you can push some of the things that can take your time and distract you and distract your parties from focusing on resolution and shift that to the fourth party, and that can free you up as a third party to focus on the things that only you as a third party human can actually do in the case, like focus on the psychology of the disputants. And the fourth party, the thing about the fourth party, again, we had a fourth party back in 2000 when the book Online Dispute Resolution was written by Ethan and Janet. But that was before we had social networks, before Facebook, before iPhones, before Zoom. All of these technologies have arisen over the course of the last 20, 25 years. And all of them have added on to the capability and functionality of the fourth party. And it's changed the culture in the way that we think about dispute resolution processes. So the fourth party is becoming more capable all of the time. And it's not even about where it is today. You can imagine where some breakthrough technologies that emerge in the next 5 to 10 years will also make the fourth party more powerful and more effective. The other thing that's important to note is there are some things that the fourth party can do that the mediator can't do, or at least shouldn't do. The role of the fourth party in a dispute resolution process, like a mediation, is very different than the role of the third party. And we have a lot of ethical practices, ethical standards and best practices that we teach our mediators as to how they can behave in a mediation process. But this little happy robot doesn't necessarily have to follow those same guidelines because it's not the same thing as a human neutral. And the parties know that, and the mediator knows that. So when I talk about what the fourth party can do today, many of these things sound like science fiction. They sounded like science fiction 20 years ago. You know, the notion that we would have a website that would do intake and diagnose and triage our cases into the appropriate resolution processes, process all our payments and reversals and track time, and then appropriately bill everyone, you know, administering our cases, sending out notifications, managing our documents, enabling the search large quantities of documents for certain phrases, and even the calendaring and scheduling component, finding a time when everybody can get together and meet. And then even assisted negotiation, where we allow the fourth party, essentially the software, to structure our conversation in a certain way, to have us communicate through a framework that is built into software. All of these things are happening every day around the world as people resolve their disputes. And I don't think people think of them as particularly novel or, you know, even innovative. This is just the way it's done. And very few of us would want to go back to the days when we had to drive across town and get together face to face. We'd have to call people up on the phone. Are you free on Wednesday? Okay, Wednesday at 2. All right, call the other party. Well, Wednesday at 2 won't work. You know, processing payments with the credit card carbons. I mean, this is the way things worked for decades. But now the technology has insinuated itself into these processes. Very few of us would go back. And especially the younger generation, they don't even remember a world where the fourth party did not play these roles. Now, the real question is, what is the fourth party going to do tomorrow? As artificial intelligence makes the fourth party more capable, it improves its ability to understand and participate in the process and interact with the parties. There's something called the Turing test, which was created by Alan Turing, and it essentially says, if you're interacting, say you're interacting textually on your computer with another entity, and it could be a person or it could be an algorithm, and you're asking a question, you're going back and forth, if you can't tell whether or not the entity that you're interacting with is an algorithm or a person, then that means that if it's an algorithm, that means it is past the Turing test, which means a human can't tell that it's an AI or it's an algorithm or it's a fourth party versus interacting with a person. So as the fourth party gets closer and closer, and we already see that ChatGPT can pretty easily pass the Turing test in many circumstances, but it's going to get better and better and better because AI and fourth party is learning all the time. Computer processors are becoming more powerful. We're able to store more information that it can learn from. So we're going to be asking the fourth party to do things like research in our cases. What's a fair resolution to this case? Or evaluate our arguments. You know, do you think that this argument is compelling? What is a fair resolution in this case? Or coaching us. Maybe as we go through and we're typing and maybe we're starting to get a little more accusatory, we're getting a little more threatening in our tone. Well, an AI can be reading that and sensing the tone, doing sentiment analysis, and then it can coach us back. Hey, this tone's not going to be as productive. Why wouldn't you try phrasing it this way? And that's connected to reframing, right? Which is a core task of a mediator. Helping parties see their dispute in a different way, and then understanding what's their BATNA, their best alternative to a negotiated agreement, or their WATNA, their worst alternative to a negotiated agreement. An algorithm will start to provide feedback to us on these things. And in the past, only humans had the cognitive capacity to process the information required to think through some of these complex questions. But the fourth party is going to get better and better at it. We may even rely on fourth parties to enforce our outcomes. So when we reach a settlement agreement, and that settlement agreement has to continue over the next 2 or 3 years, we could create an algorithm and say, hey, you know, ensure that this settlement agreement stays on the rails over the time period we've agreed to. And algorithms are getting a lot better, particularly at language. That's what these large language models are very good at. So they can draft documents, they can submit the documents with the courts, and we may even get to a point where soon, instead of negotiating, because obviously mediation is just assisted negotiation. Negotiation is the heart of all dispute resolution. But we might take all the information in our case and give it to a software agent, and that agent may go off on our behalf and negotiate with the other individuals or other agents to see if it can find a mutually agreed upon resolution. And say, okay, well, I got you. It comes back to you as the human and says, I got you 80% of what you were looking for. Is that good enough? And you can say, yep, that looks good. Write it up. Or no, that's not good enough. I want to get 100%. Go back and negotiate more. So these things sound like science fiction today, but these things sounded like science fiction 20 years ago, and now they're commonplace. And I don't think that these things are going to take 20 years. When you look at the pace of AI innovation, I think we're already going to see examples of this in the next 2 or 3 years. And because our parties, the individuals we are helping resolve disputes, are going to be utilizing AI in almost every corner of their lives. They're going to be using AI to write their emails or decide what to cook for dinner or create their PowerPoints. AI is going to be integrated into almost every aspect of computing. So our parties are going to expect that they'll be able to leverage those similar kinds of tools in their dispute resolution processes, and they'll be frustrated if they cannot. So fundamentally, I want you to think about these as tools for the toolbox. This is not some relentless, oppressive wave that's washing over the field that we all have to relent or die. There's going to be plenty of cases that are still resolved face to face. But we all, as practitioners, have a certain set of tools in our practitioner toolbox. And what the fourth party is doing is it's providing more tools for us. And we need to understand how to use those tools. Because as you might imagine, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But we need to have a comprehensive set of tools that can deal with a wide variety of different processes. And that's the way that I prefer to think about the fourth party. Many people ask me, is artificial intelligence going to replace human mediators? And my answer to that is no, I don't think so. I think humans play an important and essential role in the dispute resolution process. No matter how good the AI gets, it still doesn't have the ability to look in the eyes of the parties and put their hand on their shoulder and say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That human connection, that psychological component of dispute resolution is essential to an effective resolution. So an AI can chew up all the numbers in the world and spit out an amount, okay? To resolve this dispute, party A should pay party B $348.28. And that may be based on an observation of millions of cases. There may be a very strong mathematical justification for that number. But the human journey, the justice journey, the psychological journey that the parties must go through to feel like they're heard, to feel satisfied with the process, to achieve an outcome that they feel gives them closure, just having an algorithm spit out a number is not going to do it. So I'd like to talk just a little bit about how AI works. I'm not going to get too nerdy on this because we can really go down the rabbit hole. But a lot of people sort of have started talking about ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude as if it's sort of, it has a divine omniscience about all the data in the world. And that's actually not what's going on inside the computer program. Artificial intelligence, which is, of course, a term of art. There are many different people that think AI means different things. But when you think about an AI in the context of machine learning, what this means is a program, a computer program, can go through a data set, a large set of data. Maybe it's cases, maybe it's 100 million mediation settlement agreements, or maybe it's 10 million small claims decisions. And this machine learning program can observe across all of these different pieces of data patterns. It's essentially finding correlations and patterns in that data that are tied to specific outcomes. So once you create that set of patterns and correlations from that data set, you can bring in a new case and it will use those rules, those correlations and patterns to predict an outcome based on that new input. So this is a diagram that kind of shows it very simply. You bring in a bunch of sample data. The more data, the better. And you say what the results are from each of those cases that you're feeding into it. And the computer then goes through and it finds all of these correlations in that data. Some things that are even beyond our ability to comprehend them because of their complexity. And then what happens is if you come to a new case, and you bring in a new set of information, that machine learning algorithm can apply the correlations that it came up with, the model that it came up with. It can apply that to the new data, and it can predict what the result should be. Now, this basic approach in machine learning has been around for decades. This is not anything new. You can find computer programs that worked this way, even back as far as the 70s and the 80s. What has changed is the power of computers. The power of computer processors, the ability to store enormous pieces of information. It has enabled these machine learning algorithms to go much deeper into the sample data sets and find correlations that previously it might not have been able to suss out. So that's what's increasing the effectiveness and the power of these machine learning algorithms. Now, of course, that's not our experience of using an LLM like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, right? You come in and say, write me a rap about burritos in the style of William Shakespeare, and then it cranks it out. I mean, it can't go and look at a data set of other poems or raps about burritos, and it can't, look at other raps that have been written in the style of William Shakespeare. But essentially, if any of you have used Gmail, where you're starting to type an email and then Gmail predicts the end of the sentence that you're writing. You type the beginning of a sentence and then it gives it to you in gray. And I'm sure many of you have the experience where it suggests something and you go, no, I know what I'm going to write. And then you read what it suggests and you go, oh yeah, that's better. That's better than what I was going to write. All it is doing is it's looking at the input that you've provided, those initial words, and it's guessing what it is that you want from there on. And if you think about LLMs, large language models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and others, that's essentially the exact same thing that they're doing. But they're not finishing only your sentence in an email. They can write 1,000 words. And what they're doing is they're using this artificial intelligence mechanism, something called a neural network, to predict the next word in the chain. So it'll start writing a word, it predicts the next word, and then based on what it's already predicted, it predicts the next word, and the next word, and the next word. So it's using the same technique that I've talked about that's been around since the 70s and the 80s, but it's doing it at an incredible scale. And it's done an amazing job of absorbing enormous amounts of information and creating correlations and rules from that data. For instance, ChatGPT was trained on a snapshot of the entire internet. And all of that content was processed and the correlations were discovered and the rules and the patterns, and to create a very complex model. And then when you come in and you ask it a question, it starts predicting words using the model that it crafted from all of that data. So the reason why I'm so confident these AIs, these LLMs are going to get better and better is because computer processors are becoming more powerful and our ability to store more information is getting bigger and bigger. So it's inevitable that these AIs are going to get better at the tasks that we ask them to do. Now, these are the ones that are built by the big three companies. ChatGPT was built by OpenAI, but they've received a lot of investment from Microsoft. They're most closely associated with Microsoft. Gemini obviously is from Google, and Claude, which was a separate company, but has also received a lot of investment from Amazon. Not coincidentally, those are the three big providers of essentially web hosting. So Claude and Amazon, that's AWS, where the vast majority of the big websites in the world are hosted. Gemini is Google, and they host Google Cloud. And then ChatGPT is Microsoft, and they have Azure. So between those three providers, they may be hosting, the vast majority of the websites that are available on the internet. So all of these companies are building these models because they want to sell them to the people who are hosting their websites in their cloud. Now, that said, this LLM work is not purely closed source, which means it's not owned exclusively by these companies and the big companies. Some of these large learning models have been built and then released into open source. And what open source means is anyone can download these models and run them themselves at no cost. They can customize the models. They can integrate them into their own software. So the open source part of the LLM movement, the main page that tracks all of these open source models is called Hugging Face. And I think they have hundreds of thousands of models, that open source models that have been deployed to Hugging Face. And you can actually go in and download any of these. You could try them out yourself at huggingface.com. And you can see the little Hugging Face icon there. But the thing that's interesting about these open source models is, this program I find is very helpful. It's called LM Studio. It's also open source. You can go to the LM Studio website and download it on your computer, and then any of the models that are available on Hugging Face, you can say, I'd like to open up a chat with that model. And it will download the model, it'll deploy it, and you can start asking it questions, just like you do ChatGPT or Gemini. Now, the thing that's interesting about that is if you go to ChatGPT and you start asking it questions and submitting information, well, ChatGPT is learning from that, and it's remembering what you put in, and it's putting it into its training data set so that it can get smarter. Whereas these open source models, if you run LM Studio and you download, you're running it locally on your computer. You can have a chat, it will give you results, just like Gemini and ChatGPT. But when you close that session and you shut down that model, it doesn't remember anything that you put into it. And of course, those of us in the dispute resolution field, we have ethical obligations around confidentiality. So the ability to run our own open source LLMs to deliver value and help us out in the dispute resolution process, and then be able to shut it down, and then all of that information is not saved. That's the equivalent of tearing up our notes during a live mediation session and throwing them in the garbage. It emphasizes our commitment to the confidentiality of the process. So there are a lot of models out there, open source models, that are worthy of experimentation. And if you really want to nerd out, download LM Studio, go try them out. A very popular one is out of France. It's called Mistral, and it uses what's called a mixture of experts, and they've released some new ones. But new models are being released all the time. I mentioned the new Facebook model. I think it's called Chameleon or something. Just came out today. And again, it's open source. You can download it, you can run it on your machine and try it out. And new capabilities are being introduced into these open source models all the time. Okay, so the one more nerdy thing that I want to talk about, and then we can go back and focus on the dispute resolution side of this. And if there's anything if you walk away from this, remembering, you probably already knew about LLMs and GPTs, but this is an idea called RAG. Now, RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation, and in essence, the net of this is you can take an LLM, like a ChatGPT or a Mistral or whatever, and you can use RAG to teach it something. You can expose it additional information, custom data, what they call it, and then you provide that custom data as context to the LLM. So when the LLM responds, it's not just responding out of its training data, off-the-shelf training data. It also is referencing the custom data that you trained it with. So this is kind of how a RAG LLM works, where you take your documents, maybe it could be mediation training materials, it could be settlement agreements, it could be anything. Maybe if you're dealing with a particular kind of disputes in your dispute volume, you could have a lot of documents there that are educational and background information about that kind of dispute. But then essentially those documents are all chunked up and put into a special database that the LLM can consult. And when someone asks a question of the LLM, it can actually go to that vector database, and then it can reference the documents that have been provided. And then when it gives you the answer, the output, that result will have integrated in the content that you brought to the LLM. So the reason why this matters, a lot of people talk about with LLMs the problems of hallucination. And if you're just an AI and you're trying to predict the next word in a sequence, if someone asks you a very specific question, like who wrote the best book on cross-cultural communication and mediation, well, the LLM is going to try to respond, but it probably doesn't know that. It probably doesn't know that off the top of its head, because it has so much information that it's integrated into its correlation engine. But one of the things that we've found with these LLMs is they will hallucinate answers. So it might tell you the title of a book and the author of that book, but it might make it up, but it's trying to guess something that sounds kind of plausible. So you hear lots of lawyers that get in trouble because they ask an LLM to write a brief, and then it makes up the sources for the brief. So one of the good things about RAG LLMs is if you're going to be talking about cross-cultural communication and dispute resolution, you can provide a lot of very specific information in those documents. You can provide citations, you can provide summaries, you can provide a lot of content. And then when you ask the LLM who wrote the best book on cross-cultural mediation, it's not going to make it up, because it has the information in the vector database from the documents that you provided. So the risk of hallucination goes way down. And this is what we in the dispute resolution field need to pay attention to, because we need to be training these LLMs so that they understand best practices, information about the work that we do. So fundamentally, And again, these frameworks for building RAG LLMs are also open source. So Llama Index and LangChain, you can download them. I mean, you probably need somebody nerdy to do it, but you can plug these things together with an LLM. You can upload your data. You can chunk it and put it into a vector database, and then the responses that it gives you have a much lower risk of delivering hallucinations. And this is something that we all need to collaborate to do, to build LLMs that are trained through RAG on the kind of content that's important to us. So you can do this. You don't have to use an open source LLM in order to do this. A good example is OpenAI's ChatGPT. If you go to ChatGPT 4, one of the things that they've now created is something called private GPTs. And this is where you, if you're a paying customer, you got to pay the $20 a month, but you can create a new private GPT and you can actually come in and educate it. That little paperclip down there in the lower left, you can click that and you can upload documents off your hard drive, training materials, books, negotiation scenarios, anything you want, and you can upload it. And then this GPT will read it. It will learn from it. It will factor in the information in the documents that you shared with it into its answers. And the good thing about these private GPTs is they remember as you coach them and go and interact with them and ask questions. You can say, well, actually, the better answer would have been this, or make sure that you, understand about confidentiality or fairness when you make a response. And it's okay, thanks, I'm remembering that. And when you come back to this GPT, this private GPT that you've built, you can name it whatever you like. You can give it a logo, and you can also share it with other people. So someone else could come in and interact with this GPT you've been training. So oftentimes I urge people to think about the fourth party as kind of an eager intern. Very smart, never tires out, works for pennies a day, just a sip of electricity is all it wants. But these eager interns, they can make mistakes. And in their desire to please, they can sometimes hallucinate, make things up. So if you're going to work with one of these fourth party GPTs or AIs, you need to take responsibility to monitor the output of what it does, because it's not going to get everything right. But if you can train it over time, train your private GPT or train your RAG LLM, the risk of those errors becomes lower and lower because you're giving it more of the information that it needs to provide a substantive answer. So this is where a lot of the AI is going. And we need to train up our own private GPTs, our own RAG LLMs on the content that we think is important for dispute resolution practice. Okay, I'm bringing it in for a landing here. We're now bringing this back to dispute resolution. Okay, so I've talked about RAG LLMs, I've talked about AI, talked about where all of this is going. How does this matter in a very practical way for the work that we do as dispute resolvers? So this is some examples of how RAG LLMs could add value in dispute resolution, but there are many more. I'm sure you have ideas just listening to this presentation about ways that you might utilize these tools to more effectively help your parties reach agreement. But so one area would be document queries. So say you have a mediation and it's a very complex case around intellectual property, and the parties have uploaded many documents. It could have been emails, it could have been product specs, it could have been trademark applications, it could have been patents. They've all uploaded these documents into a workspace. Now, you as a mediator, it's going to be very hard for you to synthesize all of these documents. Even if you read through all of them, which may take you hours and hours and hours, it's hard to remember everything that you read. And I think I read something in one of these documents about the fact that, this trademark was, already registered in Japan or something. But where was that? What page was that on? The beauty of LLMs is that they are very good at that kind of synthesis of information. So imagine you as a mediator or an arbitrator, you log into the room, into your collaborative workspace. The parties have uploaded all of their documents into this collaborative workspace, and an LLM has trained itself on all of those document uploads. And then you can say to the LLM, was there ever a trademark application for this brand in Japan? And it will say, well, based on this document, yes, there was a trademark application and it was rejected and it happened on this date. But you can ask questions of the LLM, and your eager assistant, your eager fourth party assistant, will be able to answer those questions for you. And that's enormously helpful to you as a third party. Another one is AI-assisted case filing. So imagine you have a landlord-tenant case, And the tenant comes in and they never had a dispute before with the landlord. And you say, what kind of problem do you have? And they just start typing away. Well, the landlord sent me this letter and he said he wasn't going to give me my security deposit back, but I deserve my security deposit. The apartment was very clean and I need that money. So they're just describing this in natural text. They're not filling out a form and selecting boxes. Now, oftentimes in the past, it was very difficult for computers to make sense of a natural language submission like that. But AIs have the ability to scan this text in, to do natural language processing, and then actually triage that case into the appropriate resolution pathway. So that can help parties feel like they're interacting with these mechanisms through natural language, which puts them at ease. And then you can use an LLM to help them through what could be otherwise a very complex administrative process, determining what the appropriate path to resolution might be. Another one is, as I said, assisting in creating documents. I mean, imagine if you have 1,000 settlement agreements that you've done over the last 10 years, and you can train an AI on the template for your settlement agreement. And then you can say, okay, fourth party, whip up a mediation settlement agreement between these two parties with these terms. And it'll use your template and generate that agreement. Now, again, it's not just going to immediately send that to the parties. You need to vet the settlement agreement that's generated and go through and edit it and make sure it got it right, because your eager fourth party assistant might have made a hallucination or made a mistake. So this AI assisted document generation can save an enormous amount of time. Obviously, mediators have to generate settlement agreements, but arbitrators have to generate awards. So if they have a template award that they can use to generate, that even better. Another thing that we've done a lot of work on, which is very interesting, is AI-assisted panelist search. So imagine you have thousands of neutrals in your practitioner database, and a new case comes in, and the parties explain, well, this is a dispute involving intellectual property in the oil and gas industry, and there might have been some harassment elements to this case. Every dispute is a snowflake in terms of the specifics of that case. But if you have 3,000 panelists, how do you know who the best person would be or the best people would be to take that case? Well, if you have a panel manager, even if they're a really great panel manager, maybe they know the bios of 100, 200, 300 off the top of their head of those panelists. There's no way that they can know all 3,000, and especially all the specifics of everything that all those 3,000 people have done, their expertise. But an AI can do that. An AI can train itself on all of the bios, all of the experience of all of the panelists in that data set and say, okay, for this particular dispute, here are the 10 best panelists for handling this dispute. And it can even score those panelists and say, this person is a 99% fit, this person's a 97% fit, this person's a 92% fit. So that's a very powerful, and it may be a fairer way to assign cases to individual panelists, because instead of a panel manager kind of picking their favorites and referring cases out to the same people over and over again, because that's just who's top of mind, the AI can actually look through the full panel and find the person that really is the perfect fit for the needs of those particular disputants. And then again, we talk about an AI mediator or an AI arbitrator, where tasks that are performed by the mediator are performed by artificial intelligence, asking questions, reframing, urging the parties towards settlements, assisting brainstorming, or in the arbitrator context, evaluating information, evaluating evidence, asking questions, and then maybe rendering a decision and explaining why that is the right decision. So again, people say, well, I'm going to be replaced by that. Well, I don't think so. I think it's a matter of the fourth party may take on some of those tasks, but there's also some things that the human third party is essential for. And if AI can play a role in more of these things, that can free up the human third party to focus on maybe the emotional components of the case. I actually don't think that AI is going to displace mediators, but I do think that mediators that have AI are going to have an advantage over the mediators that don't use AI. And that's the way that this advantage is going to play out over time. And the last one I have in here is tone monitoring. I saw a demo at our ODR forum in Montreal last year. A grad student had built a solution where parties are communicating via text. And if someone is very aggressive or threatening, or they engage in insults, the AI will actually, before they send that message to the other side, it pops up a box that says, hey, this message could be interpreted as kind of aggressive from the other side. That may move you away from your goal, which is reaching an agreement. Here's a reframing or a rewording with the content is exactly the same as what you're trying to communicate, but it takes out some of the toxic communication that might create problems. And of course, the party may say, no, no, I like the original message. I want it to be a little, on edge. I want it to push their buttons, so I'm going to submit it, even though the tone police, the AI tone police, don't like it. But maybe, 9 times out of 10, they'll probably say, okay, yeah, let me edit that a little bit, and I'll take some of the sting off of it. But we already have tools like Grammarly that people use when they're writing English, and it makes suggestions about, well, your verb tenses don't really match here, or maybe a better word here is this. This is the same thing as Grammarly, but it's not for grammar. It's for conflict resolution and identifying toxic communication and trying to monitor tone for parties. And I think, again, there's something that feels a little creepy about that. Like, why is the AI, sensing my tone and making suggestions? But this is going to become very commonplace over the next few years. These kind of AI nudges, it's going to nudge us in the direction of eating more healthfully. It's going to nudge us in the direction of making better investments. And this is going to be something that probably parties will be very comfortable with. The idea that an algorithm would play that role and make that suggestion, so long as they're still in the driver's seat. So these are just some areas where these RAG LLMs that I'm referring to may have an impact in the dispute resolution field. I'm sure you can come up with others, and the mind runs wild with potential. But so the last thing I'd like to talk about, obviously, is we need to have some guardrails for the use of this technology. We often talk about ethics and practice guidelines for mediators and arbitrators, and most of the work that's happened in the field has been focused on that. What ethical guidelines should we provide to mediators and arbitrators to ensure that the services that they deliver to their parties don't cross any bright lines? But now we have to think about the programmers, because if the fourth party is going to be playing more of a role in our dispute resolution processes, well, we need to have ethical guidelines for the coders that are creating these AIs. Because if they unintentionally introduce bias into the AI, it's very difficult for the end users, the mediators, arbitrators, or the disputants themselves, to sense that bias. And if you use a data set that has bias in it, maybe somebody put their thumb on the scale, and the vast majority of the time, the winner is one side. Well, if you train an AI on that data, it will replicate that bias. So we have to put a lot of work into evaluating the sources of the data we use to train our AIs, evaluating the performance of the AIs, and then we have to work hard to debias our AIs to ensure that they truly are delivering services or assisting our process in line with our ethical obligations. And that's fundamentally what iCoder is about. iCoder, the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution, has created ethical standards for the use of technology in dispute resolution processes. And it's all freely available. You can go to icoder.org and you can check it all out yourself. We translated it into something like 12 different languages. But the goal is to ensure that as we roll out technology in the dispute resolution field, global dispute resolution field, we are thinking about these ethical conundra and taking proactive action to minimize their negative effect in the room. So the high-level ethical standards we have at iCoder are accessibility, accountability, competence, confidentiality, equality, fairness/impartiality, legality, security, and transparency. And there's a lot more detail under each one of these, and a lot of them specifically call out AI. And if you're going to use AI in a dispute resolution process, these are the sorts of things that you need to do in order to abide by the ethical standards that we're creating for the field. So I have a lot of scenarios that cull these out, but I do urge you on your own time, if you're curious about this at all, to go check out icoder.org and look at these ethical standards and see how artificial intelligence is addressed. The thing about the ethical standards is sometimes, people say to me, well, you say the process needs to be confidential, but you also say it needs to be transparent. Aren't those two things in conflict with each other? Well, confidentiality, as we refer to it with mediator ethical standards, has to do with the party's information. The personally identifiable information, the personal information in a dispute needs to be protected. And that's why disputants will come to us for help, because they know that their sensitive information in the dispute will be kept confidential. Transparency usually focuses on the process. What are the steps in the process? Who is the neutral? Who are the people that built the software that we're going to be using? What are the outcomes? And, am I going to be bound to those outcomes? So the transparency is not about the personally identifiable information. That information needs to be held confidential. The transparency is more about the procedural information and the information about who built the dispute resolution mechanism that's being used. So I do urge you to check out some of these ethical standards. And again, it's a moving target because, as I say, we have new technologies that are coming out all the time. And we need to evolve these ethical standards in line with the evolution of ODR. So that's the end of my slideshow. Let me stop my slides here. Again, apologies for not being there in person, because I'd be very interested to hear your reactions and thoughts, in light of all the information that I've shared. I am a nerd. I love technology. I acknowledge the downsides of some of these technologies. There are many pitfalls that can emerge in the use of some of these advanced technologies, particularly in an early stage like where we are now with AI, because there's a lot of unanswered questions. And it's not that hard to come up with a list of scary things that AI could introduce into the dispute resolution process in terms of misinformation. But again, I do think over time we will learn how to civilize these technologies and bring them in line with the best practices we have in the field, and minimize some of the negative potential for these tools. I think for now, transparency should be the watchword for practitioners who are utilizing AI in the dispute resolution process. And as long as you're being transparent with your parties and being open with the way that AI might be leveraged, and they're bought in and they agree in the agreement to mediate or in the draft procedural order that it's appropriate for the use of AI, and they're okay with it, well, then that's great. Experiment away. But I think it's going to be quite some time before we see purely digital arbitrators and mediators handling disputes, working with disputants, and then taking them all the way to closure. I think we are going to have a partnership between third parties and fourth parties for the foreseeable future. And the fourth parties are going to get smarter and more capable over time, but we as third parties as well will get smarter about how we can partner with these fourth parties to be effective in helping people find solutions to their problems. So again, thank you so much. I wish I could be there with you in Trento so we could all go out and get some risotto, and have a glass of wine, maybe next year. But thank you for the invitation, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, or if you'd like to get involved with the wider ODR field. My email, once again, is crule@odr.com. And thank you very much for your time and attention, and see you soon.